Well, good day and blessings to you today. I hope all is well with you and yours. I pray that you're staying safe, that we're going to get past this pandemic and back to a normal life one of these days soon. But God bless you, but be safe in the coming days. For our message today, I want us to look at an example from Matthew the 12th chapter, where Jesus gets in trouble with the teachers of the law concerning Sabbath day controversies. You know, in John 1, verse 11, it says that, talking about Jesus, he came into his own, and his own received him not. And we've discussed many times how that the very people who were looking for a Messiah, well, they refused to believe on him when he finally shows up. And the ones who ended up receiving him were people that weren't even looking for a Messiah, the Gentiles. So how could people be so stubborn and so hard-headed and so blind? After all the evidence and after all the, the fulfilled prophecies and all the miracles and all the genuine goodness, well, we can almost explain why with one word, different. See, we don't do very good with different, do we? See, our nature is pretty much just like those guys in the first century. We want people to be like us and to act like us and to respect our ways. The text here in Matthew chapter 12 is about Jesus and his disciples picking grain in a field and fixing a meal because they're hungry. And they are accused of unlawful behavior. See, it's hard to prove that you're the Messiah, if you're a Sabbath day lawbreaker, huh? Matthew 12:14 says, "But the Pharisees went out and counseled together against him as to how they might destroy him." William Barclay comments on this verse. He says, "Here we see the first definite steps, the end of which can be nothing other than the cross." Again, after all this, the plotting against Jesus, there was the result of events that took place on the Sabbath day. Now, the law of Moses, back in Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, it sanctioned picking and eating grain from another man's field. It made it okay to do this. But the Pharisees see this activity as a violation of Sabbath regulations against reaping and threshing and winnowing and preparing a meal, all of which were forbidden by Pharisaic law. Now, the second controversy concerned the legality of Jesus healing somebody on the Sabbath day. Same chapter, verses 9 through 13, we see in verse 10, the very reason they bring the accusation is an effort to try to trap him. And so we look at this event and we say, what's all this fuss about? I mean, these guys are nothing but a bunch of nitpickers. Why not see the good? Why gripe? Some people just seem to, look for fault in everything, huh? But see, this goes beyond that. In order to understand why two seemingly minor disputes created so much controversy and engendered so much hatred for Jesus, we have to understand something about the Sabbath day. And first of all, we need to understand what the Sabbath was meant to be. The Hebrew word Sabbath means rest. The Old Testament gives two reasons for the observance of a weekly day of rest. And the first one is it's a religious reason given in Exodus the 20th chapter at the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. It says, "On the Sabbath day, do not do any work. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." In other words, the Sabbath day served as a reminder of God's creation of the world and his lordship over it. A day of remembrance. Again, that's the religious reason for observing the Sabbath day. And then in Deuteronomy 5, it offers a humanitarian reason for Sabbath observance. It says, "And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And God delivered you with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commands you to observe the Sabbath day." He says, you see, man has a need for rest, and the reminder of Israel's former slavery and its deliverance from it. See, it was the cause of them to extend a day of rest to all in their employ. They had been given a day of rest, thus they are to give a day of rest. And also we need to note that the the Sabbath day regulations, they were strictly enforced. Listen to Exodus 31. Therefore, the Sabbath day is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For 6 days' work may be done, but the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. So we need to grasp the meaning and the importance of observing the Sabbath day. And then in the 15th chapter of Numbers, we've got a specific example of a guy out, he gets caught gathering sticks, I guess for firewood. And the Israelite community, they stone him to death. They take this very seriously. But we've got to understand, punishment wasn't simply because a rule was broken, but that it demonstrated a flagrant disregard for the covenant that God had made with Israel. Sabbath breaking was a form of deliberate rebellion against God. And we also need to realize that the keeping of the Sabbath, it was a positive command. It provided spiritual and physical rest for man's own good. Isaiah 58, 13 and 14, it puts it this way. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's day holy, honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. So the Sabbath, we see, was not a day for man to do as he pleased, but to stop and remember God and be refreshed. It was a time of leisure and self-improvement. It was never intended to be a burden, and nothing in the law of Moses made it that. So hopefully we have an understanding of what the Sabbath day was meant to be. But what had the Sabbath become? Well, the scribes and the Pharisees, they had made the Sabbath a burden. In Matthew 23:4, Jesus says, they tie up heavy loads and lay them on men's shoulders. The religious leaders of the Jews had sought to over-sanctify the Sabbath, to protect it by interpreting the law very strictly. And in the process, they had perverted the concept of what the Sabbath was. Now, according to leading rabbis, from what I understand, they came up with 39 classes of laws to interpret from the Ten Commandments. And then in these 39 classes, they had 39 subdivisions under each class. And so they end up with 1,521 laws out of the Ten Commandments. And I believe over 600 of these specifically dealt with what constitutes breaking the Sabbath day. And it's almost unbelievable what they came up with. These deemed works that you had to avoid on the Sabbath day. I'll give some examples. One could not stretch out his hand to take something from someone else. You couldn't search your garment for vermin. You couldn't bite your fingernails. You couldn't light or distinguish a lamp. You could save a life, but you couldn't treat the sick. Not bearing a burden was interpreted to mean not carrying anything that weighed more than 2 dried figs. I mean, can you imagine trying not to break 1,521 rules out of the Ten Commandments and over 600 things on breaking the Sabbath? I mean, wouldn't you just hate to see the Sabbath day come around thinking, I'm going to have a hard time not breaking rules today? Did you know that in 160 BC, during the Maccabean revolt, 1,000 Jews allowed themselves to be slaughtered because they were attacked on the Sabbath day and they wouldn't defend themselves? Man turned the Sabbath, upside down and inside out, where it really became a detriment or a burden. And so against this backdrop, we see Jesus picking grain and healing people. Why would he do that? I mean, we know Jesus observed the Sabbath. Luke 4:16 says, and he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, as was his custom. he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read. So he wasn't one who disregarded the Sabbath as he was accused. However, he did deliberately violate the regulations of the Pharisees regarding the day. And he knew full well how they were going to react when he breaks their rules. But I mean, he had to expose these guys for their silliness in order to free the people from oppression. He had to demonstrate that their rules were not synonymous, with God's law. So whenever Jesus is challenged by these guys, he quotes the Old Testament to point out that their interpretation is wrong. And he cites the example of David, who violated the letter of the law, but not the intent, by eating the consecrated bread whenever he and his men were hungry on one account. And also the priest, they violated the prohibition against the Sabbath work every week by offering sacrifices. And yet these guys were held guiltless. And so we see that, not all work was forbidden, and some work was even required. What we see is that Jesus shows that people are more important than human rules. And God's law never meant to be harsh or meant to be a way to cause man harm. Mark 2:27 states it plainly. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. But whenever Jesus declares himself Lord of the Sabbath, and in so doing he claimed equality with God, it earned him this undying hatred of the Pharisees. Okay, now we've got to apply this lesson to us, personalize it, and tie in these Sabbath day controversies to our world. And we can draw some parallels to maybe our activities on the Lord's Day. See, we've got our modern day teachers of the law making accusations towards people over their interpretation of how the Lord's Day is to be observed. And there seems to be more division and upset and warning of apostasy today than I can remember in my lifetime. I mean, how many people come to worship and then leave upset over their experience? I mean, so how do we remedy this? Well, first, we've got to continually ask, what does the Bible say? And not only do we have to search the scriptures diligently, but we're going to have to be submissive and willing to change our ways if that's what is right. Second, we need to discover if our understanding of Scripture is consistent with the character and the will of Jesus, or if it's just a reflection of our attitudes. I tell you, the Pharisees were so zealous for the letter of not violating the Sabbath day that they missed the Messiah entirely, and also missed the meaning of the Sabbath day. And then thirdly, we're going to have to ask whether or not our interpretation promotes the good of the people. See, any interpretation that doesn't work for the ultimate good of mankind, it's got to be rejected. Now, remember, God doesn't just give laws arbitrarily. He gives them as an expression of his love. And it's a great tragedy that so many in our day are missing the Messiah because of how they see the law. My prayer today is that this Lord's Day is a blessing to you. That the first day of the week hasn't become a burden to you, that was never the intent of God. Whenever he commands us to worship in truth and in spirit, it is for our edification, for our uplifting, for our good. This new covenant that we're under, it's to be a blessing, not a burden. And I tell you, if you'll allow it to happen, a life of service to others will bring more joy to you than anything that you can imagine. So come to understand just how special the Lord's Day is, what its intent is meant to be. And I tell you, it will become a day that you long for and a day that you love. God bless you as you observe the Lord's Day in worshiping in truth and spirit. Amen.